Hi, welcome to Key Trends and What's Next for Your Data Strategy. We thought we might use John Wick as a backdrop for our story because John Wick, right? My name is Saif Khetan. I'm Senior Director of Product Strategy at Telium, and I want to talk to you about everything that's coming our way in the world of tech and data and what that means for us as businesses, as consumers, and how we can address it, almost like how John Wick might address it. So let's just get started with some of the factors that we should look at. Much like the movie, these are the triggers that kick everything off, right? So these are major external forces that we cannot discount anymore. And I'm going to talk about three of them. And let's start with the first one. So pandemic has been here. We are hopefully getting on the other side, but a lot has changed. And let's look at these behaviors from two lenses. So if you look at what customer and consumers are saying, 75% have tried new brands, new channels, new ways of shopping, and they've been willing to try lots of different things. In fact, so many of the digital deniers were forced to try e-commerce. Grocery shopping through apps was up 400% during the pandemic. And that just shows so many people who never tried this stuff were forced to try it. And a lot of them, 60% of them, are now saying that they're going to take these new behaviors, these new channels with them post-pandemic. So these changes are here to stay. And why not? So many of them are so much more convenient and so much better. So this is the first part of it, right? Customer behaviors are changing and have changed for good. So how have businesses responded? Well, a lot of businesses are doubling down on what they know. Their existing customers, their existing products, their existing markets. Acquisition is becoming so complicated and people were switching. We just saw 80% are trying new brands that businesses are being forced to protect what they already have. So 73% of the businesses double down on their existing customers and existing markets to try to defend their territory. And that's really important. How did they do that? With customer experience. The lens that businesses that survived the pandemic had to use was customer experience, because so much of last year was about safety, was about contactless delivery, was about curbside pickup. These were all new trends that a lot of these businesses had never done before, and they had to adapt them, and they had to put customer first. So that's the first major force that's acting on us. That customer experience that has been such a big part of our life for so many years is now no longer just a function of one of the business units. It's an imperative for the whole organization. So that's the first force. Let's look at the second one. Loss of identifiers and third-party cookies. Now, the technology players in our lives, the big technology players, are making some very big changes that affect us as consumers, as advertisers, as publishers. And the biggest one that just happened last week is iOS 14.5. So Apple has been affecting us for decades, right? Ever since the first iMac, Apple makes these big changes that affects everybody in all industries. Their latest one is called App Transparency Tracking. It's a framework that they released last week that forces every app to put a pop-up like this in front of you. In fact, it has to be this exact pop-up. You have no control on this pop-up except for that little text in the middle. And you can already see the variation in how much content apps are putting in this little pop-up. This pop-up is designed to show you that these apps share your device identifier cross-app so that you're okay with it. Now, guess what? This has been out for less than a week already. Opt-in rates are less than 15%. Those are the early estimates. And why wouldn't they be? Look at these pop-ups. They don't make you feel good. In fact, they're confusing. They stress you out. In regions like Europe, the European customers, you guys will know, you're getting 3, 4, 5 pop-ups because you already had the pop-up for notifications that was forced. You already had the pop-up for connectivity and Bluetooth. And now you have a pop-up for consent, and now this one as well. And this is not just on the iPhone. It's happening on the iPad. It's happening on the Apple TV. This is now part of our life. And it's already being met with so much resistance and frustration that people are opting out of this permanently. There is a setting in iOS that lets you turn off the request for this pop-up permanently. So now think about the impact of that to all of us. Advertisers and publishers are not able to track you cross-app on your device anymore, not able to track you cross-device anymore. And Apple has made a very big change to how we think about just attribution and modeling, okay? That's the first big one. Now, the second big player in this space is Google. Well, Google has been trying something similar. They started with announcing that they're going to get rid of third-party cookies by next year. It might happen sooner. And then they put a proposal forward called the Privacy Sandbox. This Privacy Sandbox is called a proposal because they don't know what they're going to do with it yet. The first initiative under that proposal, called FLoC, Federated Learning of Cohorts, has already hit a huge number of roadblocks. The EU has unilaterally blocked FLoC by saying it does not actually meet their privacy requirements. All the different browsers that use Chrome have come out and said they're not going to support FLoC. Edge, which is one of their biggest browsers, has said they're not going to support FLoC. Firefox is not going to support it. And then on top of that, there's a setting in Google that lets you opt out of FLoC. So now it's very unclear what the impact of Google's technology changes are going to be on us as consumers and on advertisers and publishers. What we know is they have said they're going to block third-party cookies. But what we don't know is what the new normal is going to look like. So Apple took away our identifiers. Google is saying they're going to take away our identifiers. We don't know. We don't even know what they're going to do. And this is happening in parallel while the third-party cookies have been blocked already. So let's look at the customer funnel. Okay, on the way on the top is your prospects, people you've not yet interacted with. Then you go into people who've come to your channels. They've engaged with you, but you don't know who they are. Then they give you some information about themselves, maybe an email address, a phone number. They become a lead, and then they become a customer, right? This is our normal funnel. On the left are all the different activities that advertisers, marketers, publishers say that they do using identifiers and third-party cookies, okay? From onboarding data to enhancing their measurement strategies, attribution, cross-platform attribution, personalization, targeting, enriching data sets. Other than frequency capping, they say all the other activities are critical for their business. And every single one of them uses identifiers and third-party cookies. And they're all affected now with these changes. In fact, if you were to take a look at how that effect will play out, in the top part of the funnel, where you don't know who the user is, you're going to have a really hard time identifying, targeting, and converting customers once all these changes have settled. In fact, it is very, very unclear for businesses that are heavy acquisition-based and businesses that rely heavily on DMPs, what the opportunities are going to be in that part of the funnel. On the lower part of the funnel, once the person tells you their email address, you're going to have a harder time tracking people across sessions, across devices, because those cookies don't persist anymore. So suddenly, a lot of opportunity that you had to collect data and to use it has been severely impacted, right? And because on the other side, the technology platforms haven't really told you, other than Apple, what they're going to do. They're in fact putting walls around their first-party data sets between Amazon and Google and Apple. It's becoming more and more unclear for publishers and advertisers what their opportunities are. They're just sort of wandering. Kind of feels like this, wandering aimlessly in the desert, not knowing where you're headed, not knowing if there's a there, and not knowing how long it's going to take to get there, right? That's exactly where we are right now in this space of uncertainty. There's a lot of things you can try, but there's no telling what the future looks like. So the second takeaway, the second big force, is that your ability to reach, engage, and convert your customers has changed and is going to keep changing, right? So that's the second one. The third major force that's acting on all of us right now is global data privacy regulations. These are here to stay. They're a good thing, actually. As data professionals and as marketers, it is our responsibility to represent global data ethics and good practices. So let's talk about this. Every time we present this slide, we end up adding more acronyms to this slide. In fact, there's a lot of them that don't even fit in here, and they keep changing. CCPA is already going to become CPRA, actually. And this is what our life is going to look like. This is what our life already looks like. If you're in the business, you got to know this stuff and you got to take it seriously. These things really matter. Some are opt-in based, some are opt-out based, some are a hybrid. We don't even know what some of them are going to be, but we know they're going to impact us. So with so much uncertainty in this space, how do you plan for what's coming and how do you understand how to think about it? Well, our recommendation is to use GDPR as a reference point. GDPR has been out for 3 years already. GDPR has had lawsuits, it has had fines, it has had adjustments. So using GDPR as a reference point is a great way to understand what other regions might experience when they roll out their regulation. Of course, it'll be different, but a lot of the behaviors of the regulatory authority, of the customers, of the consumers, those are going to be very similar. So let's see what we can learn from this, okay? So I like to say data privacy is still a toddler. And the one thing that's constant about the toddler is change. You don't know what they're going to be from week to week, from month to month. That's what is so rough when you have a toddler around, right? So let's look at GDPR. Came out in May of 2018. About a year later, there was the ECJ ruling, which changed how you were allowed to handle default values in your consent manager. Everybody had to go and re-implement their consent managers because the default values were already there. Then Schrems 1 and Schrems 2 happened, and suddenly your data transfer between EU and US was completely affected. The privacy shield was invalidated. And again, you had to rethink your strategies and figure out if you had the right protection in place. By the way, Schrems 2 has launched this whole other discussion about data residency and whether EU will allow data to be shared with US downstream or not. We really hope they will, but that discussion is ongoing. And now, just last week, Schrems has filed a lawsuit against the Ireland Data Privacy Council, saying and proving that 99% of the GDPR complaints that they got in the last 3 years have had no decision. Just process that for a second. You know, in all the world that you've heard of fines and changes, 99% of the complaints have not even had a decision. So imagine what is sitting in the wings. Now, just to prove that this is a great reference model for other regulations, CCPA has only been out for a little over a year and has already changed twice. So this is just proving that all the regulatory bodies around are just figuring this out and constantly evolving. And, you know, as they should. This is a complex topic, but just because it's evolving, we can't just sit back and be patient, because it comes with really big fines. So this is 12 months, okay? Just think about that for a second. This is only 12 months. And it's not just 12 months, it's 12 months of the pandemic. This is a time where all the authorities were busy with the pandemic. They were stuck at home. They weren't able to genuinely go and do all the things they wanted to do. In that time, we had almost $200 million of fines, 40% more from the year before the pandemic, about 120,000 breach notifications. This is just last 12 months. And I just told you that 99% of the GDPR notifications to the Ireland body were not addressed. So as the teeth from these enforcements get stronger, sharper, as the regulatory bodies start taking this more and more seriously, this stuff becomes a bigger and bigger deal, right? What it means for all of us is that data without consent is a liability. This sounds a little alarmist, but that's the way that GDPR is showing us that any region that starts enforcement, that's what it comes with, right? It comes with risk. When you are planning data collection and data activation and you don't have permission and consent and privacy planned with it, you're creating risk. And that's the way you got to look at it. So in summary, the three big forces that are acting on us is that customers and consumers are favoring experience-focused businesses, and they're adopting new behaviors, and they're going to take those with them. Our technology platforms around us are changing, and they're directly impacting what data we can collect, how we can use it, and then accordingly, how we can convert and reach our customers. And privacy regulations now are just a part of our lives. You know, even the people who are not in the EU, if you're in Asia, if you're in the US, you might think that you're fine because it's going to be a little bit of time. But if you're serving EU customers, technically, they are protected under GDPR law. So there's no telling how that plays out. In fact, if you were to take a step back and look at this, this is what it was for John Wick. They stole John Wick's identifiers, they killed his cookies, and they messed up his data. You remember this phone call from the movie? This is scary, right? So what do we do? So now we're going to give you some strategies and some recommendations of how to deal with this stuff. And we like to break it up into 4 categories. Like normally we talk about technology, data, and people and process, but like we just saw, customer identification and engagement is now just an imperative. and data privacy and consent is part of our life. So those are the 4 categories we're going to go into. So let's get started with technology and data. The main thing about technology and data that you got to take with you now is your mindset. It needs to be an agile and experimentation focused mindset. That's what you need. Let me tell you why, okay? So last year, when the pandemic was upon us, a couple of months in, everybody started realizing that all the data sets, the models, the analytics programs they had were not as useful anymore because the behaviors didn't map to the old behaviors. So suddenly companies had to very quickly adapt and figure out what they were going to do. They had to learn to learn. They had to learn to quickly try new things, to measure them, to analyze them, and then to change. And they had to do it over and over again as the waves came and went. We had all the regions in the world had multiple waves. India is in really struggling right now. And then it just keeps changing. So that became the norm, right? Experimentation and change. In parallel, our technology platforms are evolving and they haven't stabilized. So how are you going to know what you have to do with these technology platforms? You might have to have a short-term solution, a medium-term solution, and a long-term solution. So you got to think now in both sides of this coin. One is your old historical approaches don't necessarily scale. And second is your opportunity for action is evolving as well. So how do you be agile and how do you think about experimentation? Well, it's a 3-step process, okay? It's 3 different areas and I'll just quickly talk about each of them. And it always starts with collection, right? Think of your data as a funnel. If you don't put the right data on the top at the collection, you don't get all the benefits downstream. And we've all been doing data collection for as long as we can remember. That's what tag managers are. That's what mobile SDKs are. But now you need to really prioritize your first-party data strategy. And you need to have a very, very intentional collection strategy that goes with it. You got to understand all the data that you are touching and how you're going to collect it and what you're going to do with it and how you're going to store it. And that needs to be the number 1 step of your data strategy. If you're not doing that, please start doing that now because the future belongs to the people with the first-party data strategy, okay? So first is collection. And you move from that into how you store and organize that data. So the thing here is you got to think about 2 different sides of it, neutrality and accessibility. And what I mean by that is if you just take all this data and you just put it in a data lake and it's not organized and it's not stored properly, now suddenly nobody can use it in the way that they need because ETL becomes a problem in the middle of that data in any use case you have. On the other side, if you don't set it up in a convenient format in the right way, then it's not accessible to people. So we just heard that because your old models don't apply, all units in your business are having to quickly adapt and quickly figure out what to do. So they need access to more data and they need more access to that data. So while you don't have to do this for your entire organization data set, the core of your data that you want to make available to all your business units needs to be accessible, needs to be neutral, cannot be locked into a technology, and has to be organized in a way that you make available to everybody, right? And now the way you do that is think of an infrastructure that really is set up for integration and automation, right? This data is big data sets, a lot of scale, a lot of speed, lots of change. And you got to think of it as you set up your infrastructure. So this is our recommendation for your technology and data strategy, right? Have a collection strategy, think about how you're going to have a neutral and accessible store, and then think about integration and automation for all the data that goes in and out of that store. Flexibility, agility, integration. That's the takeaway on the technology and data track. So if you move on to the next one, customer identification and engagement. We talked about earlier how CX is an imperative, right? So this is CX now. So let's think about this for a second. John Wick can identify and engage customers with a pencil. John Wick can do anything with the pencil. He's the boogeyman. He doesn't need anything, but we do, right? What do we need? We need identifiers now. And everybody is just throwing their name in the ring with identifiers. Every time we make this slide, we got to add more names to this slide. Some identifiers are email-based. Some identifiers are phone number-based. Some are coming with device ID. Some are for the publisher. Some are for the advertiser. They all serve different use cases. They all serve different value propositions. And there's 2 things you got to know about these identifiers. First, no matter what identifier you use, you're going to have to think about consent and permissions. If you're in the EU, It's a problem now. If you're in any other region, then this problem is just waiting to be unlocked, right? So you got to think about this as you start thinking about your identifiers. The second thing that's true about identifiers is there's not going to be one. You are going to need multiple identifiers for your different use cases that are interoperable. There is just no way around that. And the best recommendation we can give you here is start experimenting now. You still have some cookies in Chrome, you have identifiers in Android, you have cookies in a few other browsers. Start trying these solutions now. See what works for your business, for your customers, for your channels, and start building your strategy now. You are going to need a strategy that combines multiple identifiers to start figuring that out. And then once you have that, how do you deliver the customer experience? Really, you got to go back to basics. We've been doing customer experience for our whole lives. So what does that look like? Well, we talked about collection earlier. Plan a value exchange to make the customer feel respected, trusted, and valued so that they give you their consent and their data, right? They will share with you when they understand what you're doing with the data and when they trust you. So take the time to give them the value that they expect in return, and you will get the reward that you're looking for. The second recommendation is start thinking about retention over acquisition. If you look at businesses like paywalls, like subscriptions, like rideshare, like food delivery, all these guys, they have up to 5x more return on their retention strategies over acquisition already in the last 3-4 years. So imagine how much more that's going to be now when your acquisition is so heavily impacted by the technology changes. So really double down on retention and think about contextual messaging and advertising as much as you can. And then the last recommendation, most important, is start prioritizing relationship over conversion. Think about lifetime value much more than you think about click-through rates, and you will start truly delivering on customer experience for your customers, and they will feel the benefit, they will reward you, and they will show you with loyalty and with orders. So combine fundamentals with multiple strategies. That's our recommendation in the customer identification and engagement track, okay? Now let's go to the next one, data privacy and consent. Can never talk enough about this. This is going to be a topic that we should all take seriously. We all have data in our businesses, in our environments. We all try to use this data. You have to start thinking about attaching permission to all this data. How are you going to collect all data from this point forward with permission attached to it? What does that look like? How do you collect that permission? How do you attach it to the data you already have? If you're in a region that has not got a regulation yet, you're in a great place. You can learn from GDPR, you can learn from the other regions, you can experiment, you can try different things, but make sure you have a strategy to collect permission and consent for every touch point, no matter where it falls. That's what's going to set you up for the future that's coming. Start thinking about privacy experiences and about opt-in rates. So let me give you an example. If you were to walk into a store right now, let's say Apple or Sephora, really nice stores, how would you react if the first thing the person did when you walked into the store was say, excuse me, what's your name? What's your email address? What's your phone number? Can I call you every day? Can I use your email address to send you marketing? If that's the first thing they told you, would you walk out of the store or would you give them all that information and go shop? What do you think you would do, right? But somehow on the web and in mobile, all the businesses think it's okay to start with the consent manager right in front as a roadblock. Nowhere in the regulations does it say that the first thing you do, it has to be the consent manager. The reason we do that first is because we want to put the cookie and we want to start collecting from the first click. But that's coming at the expense of the customer experience, right? And in Europe, and the European viewers on the call, you guys will know, people are getting 5, 6, 7 pop-ups before they can get to the content, before they get to the experience. They're getting frustrated. Opt-in rates are trending down. Opt-in rates in Europe are hovering around 60 to 70%, like we said before. That is pretty crazy, right? If you're losing 30 to 40% of your data, imagine what that does to all your campaigns, all your targeting, all your modeling. Everything is affected. So really think about the customer's experience with your privacy and think about what that's doing to your opt-in rates and treat those like you treat other parts of your funnel. Make them matter. Make them about the customer first And then you will start driving up opt-in rates. Very soon, CEOs are going to be talking about opt-in rates because the data from their entire pipeline is going to be going away with all this stuff, right? And that's the last part. If you have any data in a silo, it's at risk, right? So think about this. You have a data sitting in a different system in a data warehouse somewhere, and you've never actually groomed it. Think about if you want to use that for modeling and you never collected permission for modeling, what does that mean? If you get a data deletion request, what does that look like? What happens to new permissions that somebody's giving you? What if I opted out and you have data for me sitting in that silo? What does that look like? You got to think about these things. Data silos create risk, and you got to find a way to get out of these data silos. So that's the recommendation in the data privacy space. Focus on customer experience and think about the user's privacy journey to drive opt-in rates and to drive relationships. The last strategy that we want to give you is people and process, and definitely not the least, okay? We just talked about so much change and so much adaptability. Well, that requires training. The game that you guys are playing is evolving, is changing. And all these disciplines that are written here, they're all impacted in different ways. And you can't just assume that your teams can just figure this out. Some can for sure, but it takes time, it takes training, it takes investment. So prioritize that if you want the return. Okay, so let me give you a couple of lenses on this. You need to invest time and energy to help your teams evolve. All our competitive advantage is sitting at the intersection of how we combine these disciplines. How are you going to combine privacy with machine learning? How are you going to combine customer experience with machine learning? How are you going to combine technology and privacy? That's where you can be unique. That's where you can beat your competition. That's where you can do things that are yours. So start investing there. It's not going to happen on its own. Those are not muscles that any of us have. We have to build them, okay? The next part of this, and building on the last one, is really help your teams collaborate cross-team. The more your design team and your product team embrace the legal teams, the more your marketing teams embrace the privacy teams, the more you're going to do with your customer experience. There is just no other way to win the customer experience battle. No one business group can be successful at this anymore. We already said that customer experience is a business imperative. And if that's what it is, bring your different teams together. The amount of silos that we see is absolutely mind-blowing, and you will never beat your competition with silos. You have to focus on cross-team collaboration and teach them to respect and embrace each other's disciplines. So that's our last recommendation here for people and process, is invest in your people and you will be investing in your customers. So some final thoughts here. Strategy, technology, data, and skills are all necessary to adapt and keep adapting, right? That's our new future. Constant change, constant evolution. You've got to break down silos to deliver a best-in-class customer experience. Can you deliver a decent customer experience otherwise? Sure. But if you want to win and if you want to have a competitive advantage, you've got to think about breaking down silos. And when you take your user's privacy journey seriously, and when you make that about experience, that's when you will win and you will truly have a unique competitive advantage. So that's our recommendation for you. In fact, let me give you an example. Remember the coins in John Wick? That was probably the most magical thing they did in the John Wick world, right? It was this language that everybody understood. There was no discussion of value. There was no discussion of the meaning of that coin. It just worked. It was a seamless customer experience. And that's just exactly what customer experience is. It's a universal language. It brings everyone together. And when you invest in that, and when you prioritize that, the reward that you get is trust. The reward that you get is relationship. And that's what we want you to take from this. If there's one thing you take from this, it's this. Customer experience will get you the trust and the relationships that you're looking for. Thank you.